Be me, Tyler Average Dude, grinding away at a mediocre desk job in a drab concrete business park. Not exactly a dream career, but the paycheck's clear on time. The daily grind is all right. Break room. Coffee tastes like burnt dirt. Co-workers are mostly just regular people trying to survive the week for years. This place was a totally predictable 9-to-5 safe haven. Our department had a really solid mix of personalities. A couple of gray-haired dudes counting down to their pension. Some younger guys in their 20s like me, and a few women who were totally chill to work with. We had a great daily flow going, crush our tasks, crack a few jokes, groan about quarterly reports, and clock out absolutely zero office politics or toxic drama, just routing schedules, client emails, and the rare assignment that didn't put you to sleep. Our department head was a veteran named Bill. He was a stand-up guy who never played favorites with anyone. His only philosophy was to hit your targets and keep out of trouble. It was an incredibly basic but flawless way to run a team. Everybody just clicked and got along fine. The dudes would argue about fantasy football or car parts. The ladies would chat about their weekend plans or whatever shows they watched half the time. We all just trauma bonded over how bad the espresso machine was. The vibe was professional, but incredibly low stress. Nobody felt the need to censor every little sentence they spoke. Tucked away in the back cubicle was Kevin. Kevin was the systems admin dedicated to our wing of the building. Insanely brilliant guy. Kept to himself. Always wore this faint smirk. Looked like he was constantly listening to a hilarious podcast. Nobody else could hear. Hardly ever spoke unless a server went down. But whenever he did open his mouth, it was some deadpan, razor-sharp observation that hit the nail on the head. Things were completely fine, boring as hell sometimes, but totally fine than roughly 6 months ago. Bill dropped the news that he was officially retiring. We bought him a sheet cake, threw a nice little break room farewell, and said goodbye for the next 3 weeks. We operated without a supervisor. It was absolute bliss. Eventually, the upper management mass email arrived. They hired a replacement director from an entirely different industry. Her name was Chloe. The welcome email included this massive bio, hyping up her visionary management techniques, went on and on about her dedication to cultivating disruptive and equitable corporate paradigms. A bunch of us audibly groaned at the HR buzzword salad, but we brushed it off. A boss is a boss. At the end of the day, we just crossed our fingers that she wasn't completely insane, that optimism died almost instantly. The very first morning she strutted in, the entire atmosphere of the room plummeted. She wore this terrifyingly intense, wide smile that looked glued to her jaw, the kind of grin that absolutely never reaches the eyes. She immediately demanded a mandatory all-hands meeting at 9 sharp. We all dragged our feet into the main conference room. She launches into her grand introductory monologue. It was a masterclass in talking for 20 minutes while conveying zero actual information. Just endless garbage about leveraging cross-functional synergies and recalibrating our mindsets. The kind of corporate jargon that makes your brain cells physically hurt. But then her vocabulary took a very weird turn. She started lecturing us about tearing down the systemic barriers hidden in our floor plan. She claimed it was our duty to interrogate the subconscious prejudices poisoning our daily workflows. I remember glancing over at Gary, one of our senior logistics guys. He looked like he was trying to read a menu in a foreign language. Chloe then announced we were going to do a rapid-fire introduction circle, but she added a mandatory condition. We had to say our names and then explicitly state one action we would take to dismantle the patriarchy in the logistics sector. I shit you, not that was the exact phrase she used. Dismantling the patriarchy at a mid-level freight routing company. The entire conference room went completely graveyard silent. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. The women on our staff looked just as bewildered and awkward as the guys. One of the older reps, a super polite lady named Brenda, finally stuttered and broke the silence. She nervously offered that she could try to be more assertive during client calls. Chloe lit up like a Christmas tree. She praised Brenda extensively for such a brave and vital commitment. Then the circle reached Gary. This dude is 61 years old and just wants to collect his 401k in peace. He scratches his chin and says, he's Gary. He's worked here for 2 decades, and he promises to recycle more cardboard. Chloe's psychotic smile instantly vanished. She coldly informed him that recycling is an ecological metric. whereas she required a socio-cultural restructuring goal. Gary just blinked at her like a deer in headlights. The secondhand embarrassment was physically painful when the spotlight hit me. I just kept my head down, gave my name and muttered something about prioritizing active listening in team huddles. It was the most bland, non-committal garbage I could formulate. She narrowed her eyes at me, but let it slide. The meeting finally adjourned and we all stumbled back to our desks, feeling like we got hit by a truck. The comfortable, easygoing aura of our department was completely nuked in 60 minutes flat. The following month was an agonizing downward spiral into absolute lunacy. Chloe made it explicitly clear she operated under a very specific ideology, and we were her subjects. Project updates turned into walking through a minefield. Anytime a dude offered a suggestion, she would listen with obvious disgust. Then she would instantly pivot to a female coworker and ask if she felt the man was accurately framing the narrative without silencing marginalized input. It was beyond delusional. We were discussing database latency, not socio-political theory. One afternoon, our lead developer Richard pitched a genuinely brilliant workaround for a routing glitch we'd fought for days. Chloe gave a slow, patronizing nod and thanked him for his attempt at contributing. Literally 10 minutes later, a junior female analyst named Jessica echoed the exact same fix, but swapped out a couple verbs. Chloe gasped and literally applauded her, called Jessica a visionary problem solver, and praised her genius. She called it the exact kind of disruptive innovation our department desperately needed. Look at this team, a truly fresh perspective. Richard just sat frozen in his chair, looking like he took a baseball bat to the stomach. The poor dude had spent his entire Saturday and Sunday coding that patch after that circus. The guys on staff basically took a vow of silence during huddles. What was the point of speaking up? Anything you suggested was either instantly shot down or repackaged and credited to someone else. It turned into a standard routine. Chloe would pose a floor question, and every single dude would suddenly find their blank legal pads intensely fascinating. The department was completely fractured, and she engineered it. That way she started funneling all the massive resume-building corporate contracts exclusively to the female staff. Meanwhile, the men were handed all the mind-numbing grunt work, endless server maintenance. Clearing out backlog tickets, manual data validation, the absolute bottom-of-the-barrel chores that keep the company running but earn zero praise. My daily routine devolved into an excruciating loop of patching legacy, databases and running routine stress tests, stuff an intern could do, blindfolded when I finally requested some heavier, more complex responsibilities. Chloe hit me with this pitying smirk. She lectured me about how crucial it was to clear the runway so historically disenfranchised demographics could finally thrive. She actually said this straight to my face. My folks came to this country with literally 2 suitcases and $0. But sure, I am the walking embodiment of generational wealth and power. The easy brotherly vibe we used to share completely vanished. Nobody casually shot the breeze by the water cooler anymore. All the dudes started taking their lunch breaks locked inside their own cubicles just to steer clear of the communal areas. We weren't treated like actual employees anymore, just a toxic infestation. She had to manage, everyone was depressed as hell. Our overall output metrics started tanking because the motivation was completely wiped out, but Chloe was completely oblivious. Or she just didn't give a damn. She was probably too busy typing up glowing self-evaluations for the executives about how she was revolutionizing our toxic culture and elevating marginalized pioneers. The absolute boiling point happened roughly 4 weeks into her dictatorship. It all popped off in the staff kitchen. That room used to be our designated sanctuary, the one spot you could hide from your monitor for 5 minutes. One Tuesday I strolled in to grab some caffeine and froze in my tracks. The drywall was plastered with these massive, high-gloss, full-color posters covered in wildly passive-aggressive text. One pinned right over the toaster oven depicted a cartoon dude spreading his knees on a train. The giant font underneath asked if your physical footprint was oppressing the room and told you to evaluate your entitlement. Another one taped next to the paper towels showed a shadow of a guy talking over a woman. The subtext read that repeating her idea is theft and to silence your ego. And listen, I scanned the rest of the kitchen in disbelief. There were easily half a dozen more. One literally said, before you offer uninvited explanations. Ask yourself if she's already the expert. It was a targeted ideological bombardment. We were getting scolded like unruly toddlers in the only room designed for relaxation. But the absolute worst one, the one that made my jaw actually clench, was taped right above the espresso machine. It was a high-def graphic of a trendy little ceramic teacup. Stamped across the cup, in massive block letters, was the phrase, "Male Tears." I just stood there staring at the paper. This had crossed the line from annoying HR buzzwords into blatant hostility. She was openly mocking us and getting a kick out of making us feel like garbage. A couple of the other guys from logistics wandered in behind me. I watched their faces go through the exact same cycle. Sheer confusion, then absolute shock, followed by this quiet, burning resentment. Nobody uttered a single syllable. We just poured our burnt coffee and marched back to our keyboards like zombies. The translation was perfectly clear. You are not welcome here, and you are the enemy. I tried to brush it off for the rest of the week, kept telling myself to just stare at my spreadsheets, hit my quotas, and avoid the crossfire, but it was mentally draining every single time I needed a caffeine fix. That smug little teacup poster was mocking me. It felt like a calculated campaign of psychological harassment. I finally hit my limit and realized I couldn't just swallow it anymore. I promised myself I wouldn't get heated. I'd just lay out the facts like a rational adult. I intercepted Chloe in the hallway as she was heading back from a Zoom call, asked her if she had a second to chat. She spun around and flashed that plastic retail worker grin, said, "Absolutely, Tyler. What can I help you with?" I steadied my breathing, told her I wanted to discuss the new signage in the break area. Her grin somehow stretched even wider. She clapped her hands and said, "Aren't they just brilliantly provocative?" I felt it was high time we catalyzed some necessary dialogue. I kept my voice completely flat and steady. I told her straight up that a lot of the staff found the decor openly antagonistic. I pointed out they clearly target one specific demographic in the office, and it was making people feel alienated. I kept eye contact the whole time. That fake smile stayed glued to her lips, but her eyes instantly turned to dead, black ice. She let out this incredibly insulting, breathy little chuckle, said my name in this dripping, faux maternal tone. She claimed that analyzing our inherent societal advantages can be a jarring experience, but it's a mandatory step in our personal evolution. I didn't back down. I told her I understood the concept, but the teacup poster specifically didn't feel like a dialogue prompt at all. It just felt like a direct insult. She literally gasped and clutched her pearls, put her hand on her collarbone and acted horribly offended, claimed I had entirely missed the mark, that it was high-level satire meant to deconstruct historical power. Imbalances I saw right through the act. Immediately she had a bulletproof, textbook defense loaded in the chamber. For any complaint, she was never going to hear a word I said. And she actively relished the conflict. I lowered my voice and said, "I highly doubt the team interprets it as clever satire. I told her it just feels like we are being mass penalized for crimes we never committed." Her demeanor flipped like a light switch. All that fake sweetness evaporated, leaving this venomous, hardened glare. She spoke to me like she was reading a teleprompter, stating that the singular objective of these visual aids is to guarantee a sanctuary where absolutely everyone feels validated and secure. She suggested that if my walls were going up, I desperately needed to interrogate the root cause of my fragility. Then she just spun around on her heels and marched down the corridor, left me stranded right there on the carpet, looking like an absolute idiot. The sense of total failure was crushing. I made a genuine effort to handle the conflict, like a mature professional. Instead, I got swatted away like a toddler throwing a tantrum. I dragged my feet back to my cubicle with my brain going a million miles an hour. I was completely backed into a corner. Going to human resources would be absolute corporate suicide. Chloe was the shiny new hire, and she spoke the progressive HR dialect. Fluently, the department would immediately crown her as a trailblazing visionary. And I would get slapped with the label of a bitter, toxic holdout, refusing to adapt. I just sank down into my ergonomic chair and glared at the blank screensaver around 6 that night. The floor was basically a ghost town. I wandered over to the kitchen sink to scrub the stains out of my thermos. All that preachy propaganda was still glued to the walls. They somehow looked 50 times more obnoxious under the flickering night shift fluorescence while I was splashing water around. Kevin the sysadmin strolled through the door. Dude didn't utter a single syllable, just walked straight to the mini fridge, cracked open a Dr. Pepper, and propped himself against the island, took a massive gulp while staring dead at the teacup. Graphic, we stood there in total silence for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he opened his mouth without even breaking eye contact with the wall, said the interior design was really popping off. Lately noted in a deadpan drone that it truly brought the feng shui of the room together on any regular Tuesday. I would have just forced a chuckle and headed for the parking lot, but getting treated like a preschooler earlier that afternoon was still burning a hole in my chest. The dam broke, and I just started unloading on him. Told him it wasn't even about the stupid wall art. It was the entire ecosystem, the suffocating stand-ups, the blatant workload favoritism. It honestly felt like certain demographics were straight up banned from upward mobility. Now I recounted the entire hallway run-in with Chloe, explained exactly how she weaponized my vocabulary and painted me as the workplace villain. Kevin just stood there soaking it all in with a completely blank expression. When I finally ran out of breath, he let the silence stretch out. He eventually remarked that I went with the frontal assault, noted that I tried to leverage logic and standard corporate courtesy. I sighed heavily and admitted that was the strategy, muttered that it clearly backfired. Spectacularly, Kevin took another swig of his soda and said that tactic always fails. He explained that personalities like hers don't traffic in rational debate, said her belief system is a sledgehammer which makes every single obstacle look like a nail, and currently, the dudes on this floor are the nails. His dark, unfiltered read on the situation was surprisingly therapeutic. It was a massive relief to confirm I wasn't just losing my grip on reality. I threw my hands up and asked what the endgame was, wondered out loud if we were supposed to just pack our boxes and resign. Kevin slowly rotated his neck to look me in the eyes. He had this sharp, dangerous spark in his pupils I had never noticed before. He stated that quitting is exactly what the new regime is praying for. They actively want to purge the roster of non-believers and backfill the desks with carbon copies of themselves. He laid down the law and said walking away isn't an option. He let that hang in the air for a second, glancing back at the propaganda, pointed out that I tried challenging her out. In the broad daylight, playing by her rulebook told me that specific casino is mathematically designed to bankrupt us. She wields the company handbook and buzzword, empathy like a tactical riot shield, and throwing punches at a riot shield only breaks your own knuckles. He suddenly crushed his aluminum can flat with one squeeze, lowered his volume a few decibels, and leaned in. Slightly said, folks who construct armor that thick are overcompensating for something. He guaranteed she had a closet full of skeletons because types like her are universally massive hypocrites. I was totally lost on the direction this conversation was heading. Asked him to spell out whatever theory he was cooking up. Kevin cracked this incredibly dark, subtle smirk, mentioned that our new director uses her company-issued laptop for literally every function, tapped his temple, and listed off her corporate Outlook account and internal Slack channels. He reminded me that his specific title is Lead Systems Administrator, which means his primary mandate is verifying that all enterprise hardware is utilized strictly within compliance protocols, strictly for the sake of network security. Naturally, the puzzle pieces instantly snapped together in my brain. I stammered and asked if he was implying he could actually pull her logs. Kevin cut me off with this incredibly clinical, deliberate tone. He stated that if leadership is allegedly cultivating a toxic and discriminatory atmosphere, an electronic footprint of that misconduct likely exists, and it would be his professional obligation to locate that footprint. Assuming it was there, he let that sentence just float in the empty kitchen. He wasn't advocating for a cybercrime or a hacking operation. Every single thing he outlined was explicitly authorized by the signed employee handbook she was typing on, Enterprise Silicon on the company dime. Personal privacy was legally non-existent on that machine. A totally unhinged and dangerous strategy started crystallizing in my head. But frankly, a gamble was miles better than just drowning in her toxic swamp. Day after day, I looked at him and told him to dig it up. Kevin gave a single solid nod, said he was going to execute some routine. After our security diagnostics, he tossed his crushed can in the recycling and strolled out of the kitchen, left me standing solo with all the aggressive wall decor. But for the first time in weeks, The preachy text didn't make my blood boil. It just looked like the fragile overcompensation of a fraud who was about to get dismantled. I genuinely felt a tiny spark of optimism for the first time since our old boss retired. The following Wednesday dragged on for absolute ever. I swiped my badge at the front doors, with my stomach doing backflips between pure dread and adrenaline. Whenever I spotted Chloe patrolling the aisles with that arrogant plastic smirk, I practically had to bite my cheek to keep a straight face. Her preachy signs were obviously still taped up by the microwave, just serving as the perfect visual motivation to follow through with the nuclear option. The tension on the floor was so thick you could carve it with a steak knife. Eventually, I caught sight of Kevin hovering near the elevator bank. He shot me a barely visible chin nod from across the lobby. The translation was loud and clear, to just sit tight. I went back to my cubicle and stared at my spreadsheets. But my brain was completely fried. I kept looping that kitchen conversation with Kevin over and over, started sweating about whether this was actually feasible or if we were just going to get fired. But then Chloe's incredibly patronizing voice would echo in my head, lecturing me about my own fragility. My spine instantly stiffened every time I remembered that tone. This had evolved way past a stupid office prank. It was a mandatory surgical strike. We had to force some actual sanity back into this building around 4 o'clock. A tiny notification bubble popped up on my internal messenger. It was a direct ping from Kevin reading that the diagnostic sweep was finished, and to swing by his desk, my pulse immediately spiked to about 120. I forced myself to wait a full 5 minutes so I wouldn't look suspicious. Casually got up and strolled toward the tech support wing. His workstation was shoved in the deepest corner of the floor, completely barricaded by stacked hard drives and glowing screens. He was furiously clacking away at his keyboard and didn't even lift his head. When I walked up, he muttered at me to shut the window shades. I grabbed the plastic wand and twisted the cheap vertical blinds closed. The entire cubicle plunged into this glowing, blue-lit darkness. He waved his hand to motion me closer to the glass. One of his massive side monitors had a raw text inbox blown up to full screen. He explained in this totally monotone, robotic whisper that he ran a scrape on the network's outgoing communication packets, said he specifically filtered for vocabulary that historically flags abusive behavior or a toxic corporate culture. He queried phrases like problematic, entitlement, over-explaining, and boys' club. He tapped a pen against the glass and announced, "We hit the mother lode." I leaned over his shoulder to squint at the text. It was a massive, multi-page reply thread between Chloe and some outside contact who was obviously her bestie. The recipient was an external Gmail address, but every single message from Chloe was blasted directly from her official company portal, right in the middle of the workday. Kevin grabbed his mouse and dragged the scroll bar all the way to the top. The earliest timestamps were from her literal first 48 hours on the payroll. She was absolutely venting to her buddy about the new gig. One paragraph ranted about how she couldn't stomach the sheer volume of aggressive testosterone on our floor. She typed out that walking into our suite was like time traveling back to the dark ages, added that she had a monumental amount of reprogramming to accomplish here. A hot wave of pure fury hit me in the chest. Every single guy on staff had been nothing but respectful and accommodating during her onboarding. Kevin clicked the wheel and bumped the page down. The content devolved from bad to absolutely vile. She started name-dropping the actual employees in our department. She went after Gary, our senior logistics guy, calling him an obsolete fossil, terrified of female leadership. Then she dragged Richard, the lead developer whose brilliant patch she completely hijacked. She described him as a textbook case of weaponized insecurity, claimed he strutted around acting like the only genius in the zip code. My eyes jumped down a paragraph and I spotted my own name. She typed out a whole segment about this guy. Tyler wrote that I was this brooding, silent creep who gave her massive serial killer vibes. She literally theorized I was the exact type of dude who despises women just for existing. Ended the paragraph saying she was keeping a strict watch on me. The blood instantly rushed to my ears and my cheeks felt like they were on fire. It was a complete, totally unfounded demolition of my character. But the most damning piece of evidence was the thread she fired off. The exact morning she redecorated the kitchen. She actually snapped a wide-angle shot of the new posters with her iPhone and attached the JPEG to the thread. The accompanying text was essentially a victory lap. She proudly declared that stage 1 of her cultural conditioning was successfully deployed. She bragged about hanging up some progressive visual aids by the appliances, told her friends she wished she could see the absolute shock and horror on the staff's faces, called our reactions completely priceless. My gaze glued itself to the next block of text she typed that she just wanted to force a reflection of their own bigotry down their throats. Said it was about time we learned what it felt like to be systematically marginalized and mocked. She openly admitted she loved observing our miserable, pathetic expressions while we brewed espresso beneath her trendy little teacup poster. She literally called our misery the absolute peak of her workday. I had to physically take a half step backward away from the desk. This had completely bypassed a standard code of conduct breach. It was pure, unfiltered, sadistic garbage. She didn't care about fostering a progressive environment at all. She was actively getting high off of publicly shaming us. The woman was extracting genuine pleasure from torturing the people she managed. Kevin spun around in his chair with a totally deadpan, hardened face. He stated that this was the exact caliber of psychopath running our floor. I breathed out that it was completely unreal. He told me to open my eyes and believe it. He stated that the individuals broadcasting their moral superiority, the loudest, are consistently the most rotten fakes. He dragged the cursor to the absolute bottom of the inbox. The response from her external buddy was just as putrid. Hyping her up and referring to all of us as fragile little incels, Kevin leaned deep into his ergonomic chair and laced his fingers together. He pointed out that we secured the payload, but now we had to calculate the maximum damage radius we stood in, that dark corner, for a solid 60 minutes, brainstorming our attack vector. The obvious move was submitting a formal package to Melissa in human resources that was the textbook procedure, but we already mapped out that exact chess game. HR would launch a completely silent, classified probe. Chloe would get a totally private verbal warning behind closed doors. She would instantly deduce who blew the whistle, and then systematically torch our careers until we resigned. Those internal compliance teams exist solely to shield the shareholders, not the desk jockeys. That path was a complete dead end and nowhere near severe enough. Her psychological warfare was executed in broad daylight, so her execution needed to be a total public spectacle. She publicly shamed the entire roster as a collective unit. She had to answer for it in front of that exact same audience. The perfect strategy suddenly crystallized in my brain. I looked at Kevin and told him we hijack her exact playbook, a total flip of the script. The corners of Kevin's mouth slowly crept up into this menacing grin. He muttered that it was pure cinematic karma and he was fully on board. The blueprint was incredibly straightforward. We were going to mimic her exact deployment method. We would harvest her own psychotic, vitriolic text messages and plaster them all over the drywall for the entire department to digest. We were going to swap out her preachy, fake woke art gallery with a massive showcase of her own absolute toxic hypocrisy. We agreed to pull a late shift that evening. Kevin used a scheduled network diagnostic as his official alibi, which gave us total clearance by roughly 7:30. The entire suite was totally deserted. The janitorial staff had already swept through and clocked out. It was literally just me and Kevin left in the building. The only illumination was the glare from our dual monitors and those faint emergency exit signs in the corridors. The dead silence on the floor was honestly kind of intense. Kevin swiped his master RFID badge on the main double doors to confirm we were completely locked down. He gave the green light and we headed straight for the kitchen area. Tearing down her preachy propaganda was genuinely one of the best feelings of my life. Every single glossy sheet I ripped off the drywall felt like reclaiming a piece of my sanity. I grabbed that smug teacup graphic and absolutely crushed it into a tight paper ball with zero hesitation. Just having bare, empty walls made the whole room instantly feel less oppressive after the demolition. We marched back to the server corner. Kevin had already isolated the most toxic excerpts from her sent folder. We copy-pasted them into a completely bare-bones Word document using a massive, heavy block font. No cute clip art, no trendy designs. We needed her raw insanity to take center stage. The heavy-duty laser printer spun up and just started vomiting out, sheet after sheet of undeniable hypocrisy. Then we tackled the ultimate kill shot. Kevin drafted a fresh message from a dummy server account. The recipient was Melissa, the corporate director of human resources. The subject header was cold and professional, flagging a formal grievance and documentation regarding a discriminatory work environment. The actual text was incredibly brief and clinical. It instructed Melissa to review the attached logs detailing a coordinated campaign of abuse and harassment by our department director, Chloe. He noted the dossier was recovered during standard network security sweeps. He urged immediate intervention, signed off as an anonymous whistleblower, and appended the unedited PDF of the entire email chain. Then he pulled a totally genius move. He configured the server to delay the outgoing message until exactly 8:45. The following morning, right before Chloe usually walked through the lobby, he called it our ultimate failsafe. He guaranteed that regardless of the fallout tomorrow, human resources would possess the absolute unvarnished truth. There was absolutely zero chance she could talk her way out of a digital paper trail with the payload locked and loaded. We grabbed our stack of fresh printer paper and headed back to the break area. We taped our custom signs in the exact same locations where her garbage used to hang right above the espresso machine. We pinned the paragraph where she admitted to thriving off our miserable, pathetic expressions. Next to the toaster oven went the quote, complaining about the repulsive levels of aggressive testosterone on our floor on the massive blank wall. We stuck her confession about systematically shaming us just for her own daily entertainment. And for the grand finale, I slapped the excerpt directly targeting me, right on the stainless steel refrigerator door, the exact sentence calling Tyler a brooding creep who despises women. We took 3 steps back and surveyed the gallery. The kitchen wasn't plastered with condescending, vague corporate lectures anymore. It was totally covered in the explicit, documented cruelty of our own boss. The visual impact was flawless. We did a rapid walkthrough of the cubicles to guarantee we didn't leave a single coffee cup or stray paperclip behind. Then we finally hit the elevators, stepping out into the dark parking lot. I felt this massive wave of total peace wash over me. The trap was set. All we had to do was survive until sunrise the following morning. I parked my car way earlier than usual. My nervous system was completely short-circuiting. I walked straight past my desk and peeked into the break room. Our makeshift wallpaper was perfectly intact. A handful of the early bird staff were already scanning their badges and filtering into the aisles. The very first coworker to stumble into the trap was Brenda, the sweet older rep. She wandered into the kitchen, froze mid-stride, and her eyes practically bugged out of her skull. She stood there absorbing one paragraph, then stepped sideways to read the next. Utter paralyzing shock washed completely over her features. She shot a terrified glance in my direction, then immediately glued her eyes to the floor. A minute later, a couple of the logistics dudes strolled in their reaction. Timeline was totally different. It started with heavy confusion, morphed into sheer disbelief, and finally settled into these massive, vindicated smirks. One of the forklift supervisors actually let out this quiet, amazed whistle. He just shook his head and muttered under his breath. The gossip ignited across the cubicles, instantly. People were suddenly inventing excuses to take the long route past the appliances. A thick layer of hushed murmurs blanketed the entire department. Nobody explicitly knew who orchestrated the hit, but every single employee instantly recognized the author. The vocabulary and arrogance were 100% undeniable. I was sitting at my keyboard aggressively pretending to review a spreadsheet. When she finally arrived, Chloe strolled through the glass doors at 8:50 sharp. Exactly 5 minutes before the daily stand-up, she was gripping some absurdly expensive leather tote bag and a massive iced matcha latte. She was radiating her standard aura of completely unearned superiority. She flashed a few of her trademark plastic smiles at the front desks while heading toward her private office. Then she abruptly pivoted and marched straight for the kitchen to stash her salad container. This was the exact moment I kept my head down, but locked my peripheral vision on the doorframe. She pushed the swinging door open and stepped inside for about 3 seconds. It was dead quiet. Then I caught sight of her silhouette through the tiny square window built into the door. She was completely paralyzed. She took one slow, rigid step toward the drywall, then another. I couldn't make out her exact facial expression through the frosted glass, but her posture screamed panic. Her shoulders locked up like solid concrete. I watched her head violently snap back and forth between the printed sheets by now. A solid cluster of the staff had naturally migrated into the main corridor, blatantly pretending to discuss weekend plans. But in reality, every single eyeball was glued to that window. Suddenly, Chloe violently shoved the door open and stormed out. Her face had completely drained of color and transformed into a mask of pure, unrestrained, psychotic rage. Her plastic customer service facade completely melted off, replaced by an ugly, twisted scowl. Her eyes wildly scanned the cubicles, trying to lock onto a suspect. Her gaze snapped to my desk for a fraction of a second. I maintained a perfectly blank, utterly clueless expression. She absolutely shrieked at the top of her lungs, demanding to know who was responsible. Her pitch was shrill enough to shatter glass. Every single keyboard in the department stopped clicking simultaneously. She screamed again, demanding someone confess to the sabotage. Not a single soul made a sound. Everybody just stared at her, having a total meltdown. She aimed a shaking finger back at the kitchen doorway. She started screaming that this was an orchestrated hate crime and a massive breach of her personal privacy. She was fully spiraling, completely coming unglued in front of the exec staff. She spent weeks torturing right as her tantrum hit max volume. I caught movement down the primary walkway. Melissa from corporate HR was marching straight toward the commotion with totally calm, deliberate strides. She was clutching a manila envelope, and her face was carved out of absolute stone. She clearly just opened Kevin's automated 8:45 delivery. Melissa strolled directly into the blast radius. She didn't even bother looking at the printed transcripts glued to the drywall. Her laser focus was locked entirely on Chloe. Melissa's voice cut straight through the screeching low and authoritative. She simply commanded Chloe into her office. Immediately, Chloe whipped around and gasped. She started thanking God. Melissa was there, demanding the perpetrator be terminated immediately for such a toxic, misogynistic assault. Melissa didn't even blink. She flatly stated they would review the situation behind closed doors. Her tone explicitly killed any room for debate. She ordered Chloe to move. Chloe seemed to finally register that she was causing a massive scene. She frantically tried to pull herself together, smoothed the wrinkles out of her blazer, and trailed behind Melissa. She was loudly muttering something about a hostile work environment lawsuit the whole way down the hall. The millisecond they turned the corner, the entire floor erupted into a deafening wave of whispered gossip. Roughly 60 minutes later, my desktop extension buzzed. It was Melissa's receptionist requesting both me and Kevin in the HR wing. I locked eyes with Kevin across the aisle. It was go time. We navigated the labyrinth to the Human Resources Department. In total silence, Melissa's office was spotless and freezing cold. She motioned for us to take the 2 chairs across from her desk. Chloe was completely MIA. Melissa unclasped the manila envelope and announced she received an anonymous data dump that morning. She slid a full stapled hard copy of the Slack transcripts across the mahogany desk. She stated the logs contained severe, documented misconduct by our department head. She looked dead at Kevin. She noted the whistleblower claimed the files were flagged during a routine server sweep. She asked Kevin, as the lead network admin, to verify if that was standard procedure. Kevin played his role flawlessly. He morphed into the most rigid robotic tech drone on the planet. He droned on in this incredibly dry monotone about automated compliance filters and proprietary data leak prevention software. He claimed the network algorithms automatically tripped multiple internal red flags for abusive vocabulary and potential corporate liability violations. He stated that standard operating procedure dictates all flagged packets are immediately routed to the compliance department for review. It was a masterclass in deploying impenetrable corporate jargon. It was completely plausible, perfectly professional, and bulletproof. Melissa slowly nodded, digesting the technical explanation. She had zero grounds to challenge his assessment. She pivoted her chair to face me, asked if I recently approached Chloe to formally discuss the signage in the break area. I sat up straight and confirmed I had. I stated that multiple employees felt the artwork was generating a discriminatory atmosphere. But my feedback was entirely dismissed. Melissa nodded a second time and jotted a quick sentence on her legal pad. She thanked us both for our time and dismissed us back to our workstations. We stepped out of the HR suite and headed back to the main floor. The second we rounded the corner, we caught the grand finale. Chloe was dragging a cardboard banker's box out of her private office, overflowing with her coffee mugs and desk plants. She was flanked by 2 building security guards, which is mandatory protocol for an involuntary termination. Her face was completely drained of blood, and her eyes were swollen and red from bawling. She stared a hole into the carpet, refusing to make eye contact with a single person. She had to do the ultimate walk of shame, straight down the center aisle, right past the exact same individuals she had been mocking and belittling for an entire month. Nobody jeered or clapped. Nobody said a single word. We just silently watched her march toward the exit. The heavy fire door clicked shut behind the security detail. She was permanently gone. You could literally feel a massive collective exhale ripple across the cubicles. The nightmare was officially over. A few hours later, the vice president of operations called a rapid all-hands huddle. He was a total pragmatist, a guy who hated corporate fluff. He bluntly announced that Chloe was no longer employed at the company. He issued a brief apology for any turbulence caused by her abrasive leadership strategies. He confirmed a veteran internal supervisor would be taking the reins immediately, and that was the end of it. By Tuesday morning, the kitchen drywall was spotless and pristine. The suffocating, toxic cloud over the department totally evaporated. Everyone was joking around between calls. Again, the logistics crew started eating their sandwiches at the communal tables instead of hiding in their cars. It honestly felt like somebody finally cracked a window in a stuffy room around 2 that afternoon. I strolled into the kitchen for a caffeine fix. Kevin was already posted up in his usual spot, leaning against the counter exactly where he stood. When we hatched the whole plot, he quietly watched me fill my thermos. He gave a tiny, subtle nod toward my drink. He cracked a microscopic smirk and told me to watch out. Said the brew looked a little bit salty today. We both completely lost it and cracked up laughing. It was hands down the most satisfying cup of coffee I ever drank.